There is something that hits a woman's ego far deeper than rejection, deeper than criticism, deeper than being told she is wrong. And the reason she'll never admit it is because it doesn't look like an attack at all. It looks like nothing. Most men think ego is destroyed through confrontation, through harsh words, cold behavior, or dominance. They believe strength is loud, visible, and direct. But Stoicism teaches a very different truth. Ego collapses not when it is challenged, but when it is no longer needed. A woman's ego feeds on emotional relevance. It feeds on reaction, on attention, on the feeling that she still matters enough to move you emotionally. And this is where most men make the fatal mistake. They argue to be right. They explain to be understood. They react to be acknowledged. In doing so, they keep her ego alive because as long as you are emotionally engaged, her ego feels powerful. Even if the interaction is negative, her sense of importance remains intact. She knows she still has access to your emotional state. She knows she still matters enough to trigger you. But the moment that access disappears, something unsettling happens in her mind. Not anger, not hatred, but confusion. And confusion is dangerous for the ego. When you stop reacting without becoming cold, when you step back without bitterness, when you remain calm without explanation, her ego loses its mirror. There is no emotional feedback, no confirmation, no proof that she still occupies the same psychological position in your life. And that silence does not feel peaceful to her. It feels loud because ego needs reflection to survive. It needs emotional response to validate itself. And when that reflection vanishes, the ego begins to fracture internally. She starts questioning herself, not you. She replays interactions, not to understand you, but to understand what changed. What did I lose control over? Why didn't that affect him? Why does his calm feel heavier than my words? This is the moment most men never reach because they break it too early. They react to regain balance. They speak to relieve tension. They reinsert themselves emotionally to feel relevant again. And in doing so, they restore her ego. A Stoic man does the opposite. He does not withdraw to punish. He does not disappear to manipulate. He simply stops feeding what no longer deserves energy. And that restraint creates a quiet psychological collapse she will never admit out loud. In this video, I'll show you what actually destroys a woman's ego from a Stoic perspective, why most men accidentally protect it instead, and how calm detachment shifts the entire power dynamic without you saying a word. Because the strongest move is not confrontation, it's composure. Before we start, a quick reminder, the real transformation doesn't happen on YouTube. It happens inside the community. If these videos have opened your eyes, what's inside will rebuild your mindset completely. It's not just a course, it's a brotherhood, a private space where men master attraction, emotional control, and the psychology of power. You don't join for a month, you join for life. Every future course, book, and lesson is yours forever. No subscriptions, no limits, just one decision that changes your direction. If you're serious about growth, discipline, and purpose, click the link below. Join the community, enroll once, grow forever. Let's dive in. Section number 1. Why ego feeds on your emotional reaction. A woman's ego does not grow from confidence alone. It grows from impact. Specifically, from the belief that her presence, words, and behavior still have the power to move you emotionally. This is why emotional reactions, even negative ones, often strengthen ego rather than weaken it. When you argue, explain yourself, defend your position, or try to correct her behavior, you are signaling that she still occupies a meaningful psychological position in your inner world. Most men do not realize this because they confuse engagement with strength. They believe standing their ground verbally proves self-respect. In reality, excessive engagement often proves emotional accessibility. As long as she can provoke a reaction, her ego feels validated. She may complain, test, withdraw, or provoke, but underneath it all is a subconscious confirmation that she still matters enough to influence your emotional state. Stoicism exposes the flaw in this dynamic. Ego does not collapse when it is challenged. It collapses when it loses relevance. The moment your emotional center no longer responds to stimulation, the feedback loop breaks. There is no longer proof that her behavior defines your internal balance. And without that proof, ego begins to destabilize quietly. This is why silence, when grounded, is more destabilizing than confrontation. Confrontation still feeds the loop. Silence removes the fuel entirely. A Stoic man understands that not every emotional stimulus deserves a response. He chooses when to engage, not out of avoidance, but out of alignment with his values. When he steps back, it is not to punish or dominate, but to protect his internal order. This subtle difference is felt immediately, even if it is not consciously understood. When a woman senses that her emotional signals no longer produce predictable reactions, her ego loses its reference point. She is no longer certain of her influence. She begins to question the dynamic, not because she wants control, but because the loss of control creates internal tension. This tension does not erupt outwardly, it turns inward. She starts revisiting past interactions, analyzing tone, replaying moments, and reassessing her position. Her ego is searching for confirmation that it still matters. And the more calm and centered you remain, the harder it becomes for that confirmation to appear. This is the beginning of the collapse, not dramatic, not explosive, but deeply unsettling. In the next section, I will explain why most men instinctively ruin this moment by re-engaging emotionally and how Stoic restraint keeps the psychological shift intact. Section number 2, why most men restore her ego without realizing it. The moment a woman's ego begins to feel unstable, most men panic and undo the shift without ever understanding what they did wrong. They sense emotional distance, confusion, or tension, and instead of remaining grounded, they rush to restore balance. Not her balance, but their own. This is where ego is quietly handed back to her on a silver platter. Men are conditioned to resolve tension quickly. Silence feels uncomfortable. Uncertainty feels threatening. And when a woman's behavior changes, the instinct is to explain, clarify, or emotionally reinsert themselves to regain a sense of connection. But this instinct is not strength. It is fear disguised as communication. The moment you explain yourself, you reassure her ego. The moment you seek understanding, you restore her sense of importance. The moment you react emotionally, you confirm that she still has access to you. From her perspective, the internal disturbance disappears. The calm you briefly created collapses into predictability. She no longer has to question her influence because you have just proven it still exists. Stoicism teaches the opposite response. A Stoic man does not rush to relieve emotional pressure. He allows it to exist not to create discomfort, but because he understands that emotional tension reveals truth. When you stay composed and do not chase resolution, you force the dynamic to reorganize naturally. And that reorganization happens inside her, not through your words. This is where ego feels most exposed. She expects reaction, she expects explanation, she expects emotional movement. When none arrives, her internal narrative loses stability. She cannot frame herself as the emotional center anymore. And because ego depends on positioning, this loss of center quietly erodes it. This is also why Stoic restraint must be authentic. If your silence is performative, if you are secretly waiting for validation, the effect weakens. Emotional dependence leaks through subtle behavior. But when your restraint is grounded in self-respect and inner fullness, it feels solid. There is no emotional hook attached, no expectation hidden underneath. Her ego senses that you are not withholding. You are simply no longer available for emotional gains. And that realization is deeply unsettling because ego survives on relevance. And relevance disappears when a man no longer needs emotional confirmation to remain steady. In the next section, I will show you the internal posture that allows you to hold this position without becoming cold, distant, or resentful. So the power remains quiet and undeniable. Section number 3, the inner posture that quietly breaks the power dynamic. The collapse of ego never comes from external behavior alone. It comes from a shift in inner posture. This is where Stoicism separates itself from surface-level dating tactics. A Stoic man does not adjust his actions to control outcomes. He adjusts his inner alignment so outcomes no longer control him. When your emotional center is no longer oriented toward her validation, something fundamental changes in the dynamic. You are not withholding affection. You are not suppressing desire. You are simply no longer placing your sense of worth in her reactions. And this internal shift radiates outward without effort. A woman feels this immediately. She senses that her emotional signals no longer anchor your behavior. Your mood does not rise when she gives attention. Your calm does not collapse when she pulls away. And your self-respect does not fluctuate based on her approval. This creates a psychological asymmetry that her ego struggles to reconcile. Ego thrives on leverage. It needs proof of influence. When leverage disappears, ego begins to destabilize internally. She is no longer sure where she stands, not because you changed your behavior dramatically, but because you stopped orienting yourself around her emotional movements. This is the quiet breaking point. She cannot accuse you of distance. She cannot label you as cold. She cannot frame you as insecure because none of those explanations fit. You are present but not reactive, attentive but not dependent, calm but not disengaged. This combination confuses the ego because it removes the usual narratives that protect it, and confusion is where ego weakens most. Her mind begins searching for explanations that place her back in control. She replays conversations. She tests subtly. She looks for emotional hooks that used to work. But when none of them land, her ego is forced to confront something uncomfortable. She is no longer the emotional reference point. This is not a victory you celebrate. It is a position you hold. Because the moment you become proud of this shift, you lose it. Ego collapses only in the presence of emotional neutrality. The second you seek dominance or satisfaction from it, you reintroduce ego into yourself. Stoicism demands humility. You do not break her ego to feel powerful. You break the dynamic by mastering your own. In the next section, I will explain why this inner posture makes her either retreat completely or reevaluate you at a much deeper level, and why both outcomes are signs of success. Section number 4, why she either pulls away or reconsiders everything. When a woman's ego can no longer find leverage, the dynamic reaches a turning point. This is the moment where outcomes diverge, and many men misinterpret what they see. They assume pulling away means failure and re-engagement means success. Stoicism teaches a more grounded truth. Both reactions are information, not judgment. If she pulls away, it is not because you lost value. It is because her ego no longer feels comfortable in the previous position. When emotional access disappears, some women retreat to protect their sense of self. They step back to regain internal balance. This withdrawal is not rejection. It is recalibration. Your calm has disrupted the familiar dynamic, and distance becomes a way to regain stability. This is where weak men chase. They reach out to soften the shift. They explain themselves to avoid being misunderstood. They re-enter emotionally to prove they are still available. And by doing so, they restore the old structure and revive the ego they unintentionally destabilized. A Stoic man does not do this. He allows the recalibration to complete. He does not interpret withdrawal as a threat to his identity. He remains steady, not to punish, but because he understands that emotional truth emerges only when pressure is not relieved prematurely. If she re-engages, the reason is even more revealing. Re-engagement after ego destabilization is not about attraction alone. It is about orientation. She is trying to understand the new emotional terrain. She wants to see if the calm is real, if the posture is stable, if her influence has truly changed. This is where composure matters most. If you respond with need, excitement, or emotional overreach, the shift collapses. But if you remain warm, grounded, and self-contained, the new dynamic begins to solidify. Her ego adjusts not through defeat, but through acceptance. She starts relating to you from a different psychological level, and that is where respect replaces control. The Stoic does not chase either outcome. He does not try to force re-engagement, and he does not fear distance. He understands that when ego loses leverage, the relationship must either transform or dissolve. Both outcomes are victories because in both cases you did not abandon yourself to maintain relevance. In the next section, I will show you how to respond correctly if she re-enters your space so the power remains balanced and your presence remains steady. Section number 5. How to respond without rebuilding the ego. You just dismantled. When she re-enters your space after her ego has been destabilized, the situation becomes delicate. This is the moment where many men unknowingly reverse everything they achieved. They interpret her return as a green light to emotionally lean forward, explain themselves, or seek reassurance. In doing so, they rebuild the very structure that was quietly collapsing. A Stoic man responds differently. He does not punish her with distance, and he does not reward her with over-availability. He remains exactly where he was internally before she reappeared, calm, grounded, self-contained. His emotional posture does not change just because her attention does. This consistency is what finalizes the shift. When you respond with relaxed confidence instead of urgency, she feels the difference immediately. There is no emotional spike to grab onto, no surge of validation, no confirmation that she has regained control. Instead, she encounters the same steady presence that unsettled her ego in the first place. This is where true respect forms. You engage without chasing. You listen without over-explaining. You speak honestly without defending your position. You allow connection without accelerating intimacy. Every interaction communicates the same message without words. Your emotional center belongs to you. This forces her ego into a new position. She can no longer rely on emotional leverage to guide the dynamic. She must either meet you at your level of stability or disengage entirely. And this is where attraction transforms from volatility into depth. A critical mistake to avoid here is subtle compensation. Many men think they are staying calm, but they slightly overgive. They text a little faster. They reveal a little more. They become a little more accommodating. These micro shifts may feel harmless, but ego notices patterns, and patterns restore confidence in control. Stoicism requires internal honesty. You are not withholding warmth. You are withholding dependence. You are not being distant. You are being sovereign, and sovereignty cannot be negotiated through emotional testing. When you maintain this posture, something irreversible happens. She stops trying to manage the dynamic. She stops testing emotional access. She begins interacting from respect instead of leverage, and if she cannot do that, she eventually removes herself without drama. Both outcomes preserve your power. In the final section, I will bring everything together and show you the single Stoic truth that makes this effect permanent, not situational. Section number 6, why this effect works even when you say nothing at all. The most unsettling part of this dynamic is that it continues even in complete silence, not because silence is powerful on its own, but because meaning does not come from words. It comes from position, and once your position shifts internally, everything else follows automatically. When a man is emotionally sovereign, his absence carries the same weight as his presence. This is something ego struggles to accept. Ego expects feedback. It expects confirmation. It expects emotional exchange to validate its importance. When none arrives, the mind fills the gap on its own. This is why her thoughts do not settle. She is not reacting to what you are doing. She is reacting to what she can no longer access. Your emotional neutrality removes the familiar structure she relied on to orient herself. She cannot measure herself through your reactions anymore. And without that measurement, her ego feels unanchored. Silence becomes a mirror, not a mirror that reflects her power, but one that reflects uncertainty. She begins to ask internal questions she never needed to ask before, not because you demanded anything, but because your calm made old assumptions invalid. The dynamic no longer runs on emotional exchange. It runs on presence versus absence of control. This is where most men underestimate the depth of the effect. They think attraction fades in silence. In reality, unresolved emotional positioning intensifies. Her mind revisits moments not to reconnect emotionally, but to regain orientation. She searches for signs she missed, for shifts she didn't notice, for the point where the dynamic stopped revolving around her. And the more consistent your composure remains, the more permanent the imprint becomes. This is not about winning. It is about stepping out of a game you never needed to play. When you no longer require emotional engagement to feel stable, the entire structure collapses on its own. Ego cannot negotiate with silence that comes from wholeness. It cannot provoke reaction where none is available, and it cannot dominate a man who is no longer emotionally positioned beneath it. This is why the effect lasts, because you did not do something to her. You became someone she could no longer move. And once that happens, words are unnecessary. Silence carries the truth fully. Section number 7. Why walking away? Peacefully is what finalizes the shift. The final stage of this dynamic is not silence. It is peaceful disengagement. This is the point where the effect either becomes permanent or fades completely depending on how grounded you are in yourself. Many men think walking away means cutting contact dramatically or proving independence through distance. Stoicism teaches something far more subtle and far more powerful. Walking away peacefully means you no longer need emotional resolution. You do not seek closure. You do not seek understanding. You do not seek to be right. You simply continue forward without carrying emotional weight from the interaction. This is devastating to ego not because it feels cruel, but because it removes the final illusion of control. Ego expects resistance. It expects emotional residue. It expects unfinished business. When none of that exists, it has nothing left to hold on to. A woman can feel when a man has emotionally moved on without bitterness. There is no anger to provoke, no sadness to soothe, no pride to challenge, only calm progression. This is the moment her ego fully realizes that the dynamic has shifted beyond recovery. Not because she lost you aggressively, but because she no longer occupies the same psychological position she once did. You are not rejecting her. You are simply no longer orienting yourself around her presence. This is why peaceful detachment feels heavier than dramatic exits. Drama invites engagement. Peace closes the door without slamming it, and ego cannot fight a door that was never slammed. It can only sit with the realization that the man she once influenced now walks freely without emotional attachment. This does not always bring her back, and that is the point. The goal was never to trigger regret or provoke response. The goal was self-alignment. And when alignment is real, outcomes no longer matter. Attraction may reappear, respect may deepen, or the connection may dissolve quietly. All three outcomes are victories, because in every scenario, you did not abandon yourself. When a man reaches this stage, he no longer needs strategies. He no longer calculates reactions. He no longer wonders what affects her ego. He is no longer participating in dynamics that require him to be emotionally smaller than he is. And that is why this seventh stage seals everything, not through silence, not through control, but through inner closure. In short, what truly unsettles a woman's ego is not rejection, coldness, or confrontation. It is the quiet realization that she no longer defines your emotional center. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop seeking validation, the dynamic shifts at its root. Ego does not fall because it is attacked. It fades because it is no longer fed. A Stoic man does not try to humble anyone. He simply refuses to abandon himself to maintain relevance. His calm is not a strategy. It is a consequence of self-respect. His silence is not punishment. It is alignment. And his composure is not emotional distance. It is emotional mastery. This is why she will never admit what truly happened. From the outside, nothing dramatic occurred. No argument, no confrontation, no visible loss. But internally, the structure that once supported her ego quietly dissolved. She felt the shift not through words, but through absence of reaction, through the loss of leverage, through the realization that her emotional influence had limits. And once a woman senses that a man is emotionally sovereign, she must either respect him or remove herself. There is no third option. This is the power of Stoicism in relationships.